Good morning everyone, I'm Louise and I'm the Early Careers Advisory Group Chair, and we're going to talk to you today about my becoming a successful OR analyst for chemists, I just want to say, because I'm a chemist. I didn't study OR or stats or anything like that. So I'm just going to talk you through a bit of the things that I've learned thus far whilst working in OR for the past 2 years, and some sort of hints and tips and that sort of thing. So, if I can make the slides switch. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bit of a personal history, so my CV and my OR CV. Then talk about what my definition of operational research is and how it's changed from 2012 when I first came into OR to what it is now. What makes a successful OR analyst, or what I think makes a successful OR analyst, and the things that I'm trying to do in my day-to-day career to make sure I'm good at my job. A bit of a shameless plug, I'm going to talk about the things that I'm involved with the OR Society, so that's the Inside OR magazine and the Early Careers Advisory Group, and try and convince all of you guys that you want to join in and be a part of it and sort of help me out a little bit. Then I'll wrap up and take any questions, so if you've got questions, just sort of save them to the end. So, my personal history, so my CV. A-levels, maths, chemistry, biology and computing. Then I went on to study chemistry, as I've mentioned, at Nottingham University, because back then I didn't really know what OR was, nor did I really know particularly what I wanted to do as a career. I certainly wasn't coming to careers fairs or anything like that. I was just thinking, what am I good at? I'm good at chemistry, that's what I'll do at university. So I studied chemistry, realised I really did quite like it and I was quite good at it. So I went on to do a PhD in chemistry, which I finished in March of 2013. Title up there, a bit long, I won't bother reading it out to you. When I finished my PhD, I was deciding, do I want to stay in chemistry? Is a life in the lab for me? And I think if any of you do go on to do postgraduate research, then you'll probably decide fairly quickly whether or not a PhD and a life in the lab forever and ever is for you. And I knew pretty much that it wasn't. As much as I enjoyed being in the lab, I knew that my career wasn't going to keep me in the lab. So I then decided, okay, what else can I do? What else am I good at besides chemistry, basically making things catch fire? So I thought, okay, I'm quite an analytical person. I like solving problems. I like doing Sudoku in the newspaper. What can I do with those skills? And it was during my PhD that I actually came across operational research in terms of experimental design. So I was doing lots of different experiments, trying out, and I came across the technique that is experimental design. I thought, oh, this seems quite handy. I'll try and use this somehow. And then that led me to discovering what the rest of OR was. I was like, it's a whole entire field that I feel like I've been using for a lot of years, but had never actually heard of before. And then I looked at some jobs, I looked into what OR was and thought, I could probably do this. And so I looked into some jobs and I got my first OR job with the Department of Health. And I was an OR analyst in the payment by results team. So it's a finance area of Department of Health. I did a secondment whilst I was there as well to analytical services in NHS England, which is like an arm's length body of the Department of Health. And in May of this year, I joined DSTL, Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, which is part of the Ministry of Defence, and I'm currently working as an OA analyst, because we call it OA in Defence rather than OR, working as an OA analyst in future dismounted systems. So anything to do with soldiers, basically, is the stuff that I analyse now. So I've gone the wrong way. There we go. So my OR CV. So when I was applying for all of my OR jobs, I was like, how do I spin this so that employers think, yeah, she's got the right skills. So how do I turn 3 degrees in chemistry and lots of work experience in chemistry and teaching chemistry into something that OR employers are going to think, absolutely, we're going to employ this girl. So I went back, right the way back to my A-levels and thought, well, I've probably been doing OR just without knowing there was such a thing as OR. So I went back, right the way back to my A-levels. And I thought, right, okay, in my maths A-level I did lots of stats. I did decision and discrete, which turns out is OR. I just didn't have any idea what it was at the time. So I thought, that's a good place to start. I've been doing OR since A-level, just didn't know about it. went back through all of my modules in chemistry at my undergrad level, and I thought, okay, there's got to be some sort of maths in here, because chemistry is quite a mathsy subject, which I didn't know when I was applying. So I did a lot of statistics, and I did a lot of computational chemistry, which is like simulation modelling, just with a chemistry flavour. So I thought, right, good, more evidence for me to use with employers. And it wasn't really until my PhD when I think I did the most OR, but again, without realising it. So again, lots of stats. Stats have sort of followed me throughout my career without being necessarily by design. Lots of computational chemistry, so lots of chemistry modelling. Lots of problem structuring, because that's what research is. It's about figuring out what the problem is, figuring out how you're going to try and solve this problem, and then obviously, inevitably going back and refiguring out how you're going to try and solve the problem because it didn't work the first time that you did it. So I did lots of problem structuring and, like I said, lots of experimental design. And it wasn't until 2012 when I first came across what OR was and then started branding what I was doing as operational research. And then when I joined Health, obviously as an OR analyst, I was definitely doing OR then. I did, again, lots more statistics, lots of spreadsheet modelling, and because the team I was in was quite finance-based, I did a lot of financial modelling as well. Quite a bit of economics was thrown in there for good measure. Some linear programming, which is fairly bread and butter, I think, in any OR role that you'll do. Some forecasting, system dynamics, all that sort of thing. So I've done quite a lot of hard OR. And then when I was obviously joining the department, I started to do a lot of soft systems as well. So a lot of soft OR, like stakeholder engagement, multi-criteria decision analysis. So all of the sort of things I never could have picked up in an academic environment are the things I started to learn once I got into actually practicing OR, so more the softer side. And joining DSTL, again, there's a lot of elements of the hard OR in there, so there's statistics obviously, spreadsheet modelling, problem structuring, combat modelling and simulation, which is something I've never done before. I've done modelling before, but never from a defence perspective, but there's the two different situations have lots in common. Wargaming as well, I've done a lot of that in the past 6 months. And again, stakeholder engagement, but there's a big focus on the stakeholder engagement, especially in DSTL, as we're moving towards being more of a technical partnering organisation rather than just an analysis organisation. So the aspects of dealing with stakeholders, dealing with customers, defining what the customer actually wants is becoming a bigger and bigger part of what I do on a day-to-day basis. And it's becoming, if not already is, just as important as the actual hard way and technical skill. So, defining OR in 2012. So, if you've ever Googled operational research and gone on the first link, which is the Wikipedia link, then you'll probably recognise these 3 bullet points. So, essentially, operational research is a discipline that deals with application of advanced analytical methods to help make better decisions. And when I was asked in my first OR interview, when I was applying for the job at DH, the interviewer asked me to define what operational research was, and that is exactly what I said. Because I remember I'd learned it word for word and I parroted that out and I was really proud of myself, and she knew that it was from Wikipedia because it's not the first time she'd heard it that day, but she'd heard it a few times, but I thought I was being quite clever. Anyway, so I put this slide up because I don't normally like to have slides which are just text, but I think my understanding of OR back in 2012 when I first really discovered what it was a very academic definition. I didn't really know anything beyond what I could Google or what I could find in a textbook or the actual practices. So it was a very academic thing for me rather than the definition that I have of it now, which is, yes, you do still have the theory, and then there is a very set construct of what OR is and the steps you have to go through and everything like that. So there is still a theoretical understanding of it, but in practice, so you've got the theory on the left and then the in practice on the right, it's a lot not messier, but there's a lot more involved, and it's not always as straightforward as you think it's going to be, and you think something's going to take a certain length of time, but invariably it will take longer, because what you have to factor in is that you're dealing with other people, and OR it primarily deals with fixing problems for other people, and when you're dealing with people, nothing is ever as linear as you would like it to be. So my definition of things now is that yes, it is an academic discipline and an academic subject, but it's not as neat and as cut and dry as I would have thought it was when I decided I wanted to do OR in the first place. Because what I suppose I've learned is that I need to factor in the customer, because the customer is primarily who you're dealing with, who you're working for at the end of the day. So in terms of... There we go. What makes a successful OR analyst? My first point, I've tried to limit it to 3, or stretch it out to 3, is a good balance between hard and soft. So you obviously need the hard techniques because that's the bread and butter of what you're going to be doing. And you need to understand the principles of those because you're going to have to apply them in all sorts of different situations. So when I was working in health, I had to apply forecasting to figuring out the number of emergency admissions we were going to have in hospitals. And now I'm in defence, I have to apply forecasting to trying to figure out what sort of our army fleet is going to look like in 2035. So it's 2 completely different scenarios, but you would use very similar techniques in order to try and answer those 2 questions. So you do need a good grasp of the techniques themselves, but you also need very strong communication skills because everything that you do, you have to communicate back to your customer to make sure that you're doing what they want you to do in the first place and to make sure that they've understood what it is that they're going to give to you and you're going to give to them. So I think it's important, they're both equally important to have a good grasp of the hard OR but also an equally good grasp of the soft OR because they complement one another very well in the workplace. Next tip, I suppose, is breadth as well as depth. So I think in the OR toolkit, according to the Gauls website, I think there are 157 hard OR techniques, and I don't think anybody is ever going to be a master of all of them. I know I'm not. I'm probably maybe a master of about 5. But of those 5, I know those in quite good depth. So if you were to ask me something specific about one of those 5, I won't name the 5 because then you might ask me a specific question and I won't be ready to answer it. But anyway, so you need to have the depth in a certain number of areas, but by no means all of them. But you should have the breadth in that you should have the knowledge of a lot of the techniques, not necessarily have an in-depth knowledge of how they all work and the principles on which they're all based, but a working understanding. And so you can, if you were to read the Wikipedia first overview paragraph, you'd be like, oh, right, okay, I understand that. I reckon I could use that in a day-to-day environment sort of thing. So I think breadth as well as depth, if you can find that balance between the 2, is really important as well. Lastly, versatility is essential. I don't really like that heading, but I couldn't think of anything else, so we'll stick with it. So I mean versatility in that you're going to have to pick things up fairly quickly. Someone is going to ask you something and guaranteed you won't always know the answer. In fact, sometimes you'll nod and you'll smile and you'll bluff your way through, but you won't always know the answer, and then you're going to have to go back and figure out the answer and make it look like you knew all along. And you have to do that convincingly. So versatility, I think, is essential because OR is constantly evolving. So you've got your current hype around analytics and big data and all things like that wouldn't necessarily have been buzzwords in OR, say, 10 years ago. So it's constantly evolving, and so you have to constantly evolve with that. So you have to make sure that you're updating your skill set in line with the way that the discipline is changing itself. So, like I said, no one expects you to be an expert in everything, and if you are, that's amazing, well done. But you should be able to pick up new things as quickly as the subject itself is evolving, because you don't want to find yourself in a position where there's a new technique and suddenly everyone is like, right, yeah, we're all going to work in analytics forever and ever and amen, and we're going to rename the entire discipline analytics, and you're just like, oh, well, I don't really know what analytics is. I don't really think it's part of OR. So you need to just make sure that you're sort of on the pulse of the subject as that grows. Now for the shameless plug time. So currently I write the Young to OR section of the Inside OR magazine. So when you subscribe, you definitely get a copy of Inside OR. And if you click through, you will find my little articles and my name in there. And so I basically write monthly articles relating to various topics about being new to OR, also going into OR from a non-OR background, because obviously I don't have a formal OR background. I do like problem pages, so different puzzles relating to different techniques and that sort of thing. I talk about different techniques, about soft OR, about hard OR, all those sorts of things. I even wrote a piece on big data fairly recently. But I'm always open to suggestions. I love it when other people say they want to write an article, because sometimes I do run out of things. I've been doing it for a year and a half now, and I think fairly soon I'm going to run out of things to say every month. So I'm always happy for other people to get involved, even if it is to criticise. I mean, I won't cry about it, or at least not so you can see. So I'm always happy for people to get involved, get in touch, if they want to write something themselves, if they want to pick holes in something I've written, which has happened to me before. I did write a puzzle once, and I published an answer, and the answer was wrong. And so people were really, really quick to point out that I was wrong. They're never so quick to send in the answers. They were just quicker to point out my own errors, which is fine. I'm not upset about it. And if you have any thoughts, anything that you'd like to see, feel free. My email is always in there, or you can come and talk to me later on. Yeah, just get involved and make my life a little bit easier. It will always be nice. And the other thing that we're doing at the moment is the Early Career Advisory Group, which we had our first meeting on the 23rd of September. And we discussed the 10 strategic areas of importance to the society. So where we think we need to go in order to improve our offering to newer members and to people who are new to the OR field. So the meeting itself was a really fun meeting. I don't mean to sound so surprised, but it was made up of people in academia, public sector like myself, people who work in the private sector, and we basically just sat together and brainstormed about what we think the OR Society should be doing in future and how we can maintain the memberships that we have, increase the memberships that we have going forwards, and try and basically just best represent what people like yourselves would want to get out of a professional society. And it's early careers, so I am fairly early in my career. I wouldn't necessarily say I was that young anymore. Well, you can probably see from the slides when I graduated first time around, so I wouldn't necessarily say that young, but I think people, yourselves particularly, really need to get involved in that so that we can make sure we're representing what people actually want as opposed to what we think other people want, because we might not get it right every time. You might want something entirely different to what I would think you would. So again, absolutely, get involved as much as you possibly can. I'm willing to take any suggestions on board. I'm sure everyone else is too, so absolutely come speak to me later if you really think you could help. So to wrap up, because you're going to be hearing from me twice more today, OR constantly evolving, and therefore we should be constantly evolving with it. In order to succeed, I've put an asterisk next to being successful as an OR analyst, because this is a work in progress. I've only been an OR analyst for approaching 2 years now, and I'm still making mistakes, and I probably will continue to for quite a while. So I'm still in the process of figuring out, but thus far, these are the things that I've learned. So good balance of hard and soft, developing both a breadth and a depth of skill and knowledge, and being as versatile as you possibly can be, and as versatile as time allows as well. Finally, the OR Society is constantly seeking to improve its offering to students and new analysts, so you should all get involved because that would make me really happy. And thank you very much for your kind attention. Any questions?
Any questions for Louise?
Nope.
One?
Yeah, actually, you said about your previous experience
Yeah.
and not being direct, needing professional research.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that if you hadn't had a PhD in chemistry, that the A-level and the bachelor's degree would be sufficient to get your foot in the door?
I think it would. I don't, not to criticise my own degrees here, but I don't necessarily think that I needed that level of study. I think it's just at that point when I realised it. So if I had realised it during my masters, I think I would have still had plenty of evidence during the degrees that I'd done before that to still go ahead and say I've got the right skills to be doing this. So I've got the problem-solving skills and the analytical skills, and I don't. Whilst yes, I did develop them more in my PhD, I still think if I'd have realised earlier, if I'd have realised when I finished my masters that hang on, I've been doing operational research all this time, I could have gone into it then, and I don't think that having my PhD meant, yes, definitely I've got way more skills now than I had before, because the skills that I used during my PhD were skills that I already had. I just did more of it because obviously I spent 3.5 more years. So I don't think it was a case of the PhD that led me there. It's just me being slow to realise that that's where I was going to go. So I don't think it was an advantage, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. Yeah.
Hi. Given that you didn't study OR at university,
Mm-hmm.
how did you learn those techniques that you said you'd become quite strong with? Did you to? Was that through training with your employer? Or
Yes. So I work for a civil service, and they're very good with their training. And I did point out to my line manager when I joined that my primary issue is that I don't have an OR background. And I was working with people who have masters and bachelors and all these things in OR, and yes, I have a PhD, but it's in chemistry. It's absolutely not relevant anymore, although it is nice to have. So I did sort of insist when I joined that I wanted to go on courses, and so I did distance learning with Strathclyde University. So I did a lot of their courses just to make sure that I had the formal academics behind it, so that I could support my depth of knowledge, because I do feel it's important to have the formal academics, and I was acutely aware that I didn't have that. So I did distance learning, which was really useful, which meant I could work at the same time. Anyone else? You can ask me questions again later, because I'll be speaking twice more.
That's all. Thank yous again.